I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune RESET, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Autoimmune RESET podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist, and expert in autoimmune disease. And today we're delving into some of the research, and there has been a recent study that looked into the role of gliadin, which is a compound that is found in wheat. And it gives us an indication of how gluten can affect the gut lining in people with celiac disease. So I want to go into this study in a bit more detail because I find that the way gluten affects our body is extremely fascinating. And if you're not aware, I am gluten-free, and I found going gluten-free helped me immensely. And I have done various tests for celiac disease and food sensitivities all around gluten, but I think it's sometimes the way that it affects you indirectly or through these other mechanisms that it can create an issue in the body. It certainly doesn't mean everybody needs to go gluten-free. I work with lots of people who go gluten-free and don't see any difference in their health, and that's when we realise that it probably isn't to do with that and we explore other avenues. It is something to be aware of because I think there's going to be more and more research around the effect of gluten on our body, and that's what I want to talk about today. So the study that we're going to be looking at is called the Coeliac Disease Superantigen Oligomerizes and Increases Permeability in the Enterocyte Cell Model. And we'll talk more about what that means. But this study came from the Bielefeld University in Germany. And what they have found is that with celiac disease in particular, there is a process by which gluten affects the intestinal lining, and that can create this inflammatory response that we see in celiac disease. So let's first talk about what celiac disease is, because celiac disease affects millions of people worldwide. And it is an autoimmune disease where the ingestion of gluten leads to damage in the intestinal wall, and it can create a lot of inflammation. So not only does it cause inflammation, which then can cause lots of issues throughout the body, but it can also lead to damaging of the gut lining, and that's where we absorb our nutrients, and it can lead to severe nutrient deficiencies as well. But the study that we're discussing today offers insights into how the disease progresses at the cellular level, which you know I love to talk about, and opens up potential avenues for new treatments. But we can also think about things from a natural perspective as well. As you will see from the title of the study, they are talking about a super antigen. So what is a super antigen? Because when it comes to an autoimmune disease, something is firing up the immune system, and that is what we call an antigen. And an antigen can be many things. Very simply, it's normally a component of a virus or a bacteria, so your immune system knows to respond to that. But it can also be a food particle. It can be a chemical that's attached to part of your cells or a protein and cause an immune reaction. It can be to do with a mold toxin that has caused a reaction in the body, but it is a protein that stimulates your immune system to fire up and start attacking because it feels that there is something in your body that shouldn't be there. But when it comes to a super antigen, this is a class of antigens that results in an excessive activation of the immune system, and that can lead to a massive release of cytokines. And cytokines are those signaling molecules that can cause inflammation and tissue damage, and we saw that a lot through the pandemic, that there was this cytokine storm in some people, and that's when the cytokine messages really got out of sync and just ended up being very overreactive and causing a lot of damage, for example, in the lungs, because cytokines are there to speak to the immune system. And for the most part, they are there to recruit immune cells to that area so that they can defend you and protect you. But cytokines also have a role in immune tolerance, which is where we make sure that we don't cause any further damage to the area. But in this context, it's the cytokines that lead to inflammation. And in the context of celiac disease, the superantigen that they have identified in this study has been seen to be a crucial player in the disease progression. So the study explores how this superantigen behaves in an enterocyte cell model. And enterocytes are the cells that line the small intestine, and obviously that's absolutely crucial to how we digest food, how we absorb nutrients, keeping our inflammation in check. So it's absolutely key. And what they discovered in the research is that there is this super antigen that they found has a tendency to oligomerize, which is quite a hard word to say. So oligomerization is the process by which an individual molecule will bind together to form a complex structure. And they found that this super antigen that is part of the gluten molecule, when it oligomerizes, it causes significant increase in permeability in the enterocyte cell layer of the gut lining, which we all know as leaky gut syndrome. By increasing the permeability in the gut, that in and of itself leads to inflammation, because we know when the intestinal wall is more permeable, it is more likely to let particles into the bloodstream and fire up the immune system outside of gluten itself. And that's why I find it interesting, because it's not just about your immune reactivity to the gluten molecule, it's the effect that gluten has on your body, in particular its effect with leaky gut syndrome, and the fact that it can create increased permeability to those who are predisposed to that. Or some studies have indicated that gluten causes increased intestinal permeability in most people. Just by that happening, and if you are predisposed to an autoimmune disease, then it's more likely that gluten is going to cause inflammation for you. As with any autoimmune disease, it might not be the only thing that's causing the issue. And even with celiac disease, as much as taking gluten out of the diet is going to be extremely helpful, there are probably other things going in the body that has led to celiac disease, and that's something that's definitely worth exploring. I think with any autoimmune disease, regardless of what it is, you have to think of where there are these underlying imbalances in the body that have created that situation in the first place, rather than just seeing it as an isolated thing. So for example, in celiac disease, just seeing it as being something that has happened as a result of consuming gluten, because some people will develop celiac disease when they're a lot older, so it's not something they're born with. So we know that something has gone on in the environment over time that has led to them developing celiac disease. So it's always worth bearing that in mind. But this study showed that the oligomerization of this superantigen, so gliadin peptide, created this out of control immune response, which led to increased permeability in the gut lining. I think another area that this study really reinforces is that it is hard to break down the gluten protein. And that's another angle that I look at when I'm working with clients, not just on which foods are causing inflammation in the gut, which foods might be contributing to leaky gut syndrome, but also, are you able to break down these proteins and molecules in your digestive tract? Because if you're not, then you are getting quite large molecules moving down your digestive tract, and that in and of itself can cause inflammation and cause disruption and cause issue absorbing nutrients, as well as causing lots of issues with your gut microbiome and causing dysbiosis. So actually how we break down food is important, and when we eat foods that are harder for our body to break down, we're putting that extra pressure on our cells and on our body. And when we have genetic predispositions to things like autoimmune disease, we don't want to add more load to our body. We want to make things easy for our body as much as we possibly can do. So the research discovered that transglutaminase 2, which is present in humans, modifies this gluten peptide, which results in this superantigen that I've been talking about. So it's the transglutamase 2, which is found in humans, that causes the gluten peptide to form this oligomer. So what does this mean if you have celiac disease? How helpful is this? Well, in the past, there's always been a debate around this permeability piece, because mainstream theory around celiac disease was always that the chronic inflammation caused the leaky gut rather than the gluten itself. However, this study now indicates that it's gluten that is affecting the gut lining rather than the inflammation being present there in the first place. And I'm sure there are imbalances in the gut which may contribute to that as well. And I will often explain to my clients, if your terrain or foundation is unstable in some ways, for example, if you're in a state of chronic stress, then you are going to be more exposed to antigens, whether it be gluten, whether it be a virus, whether it be a bacteria. So I'm sure, although this study has shown that gluten actually causes the issue in the first place, I expect it is when your terrain is slightly out of balance that this can happen. But as I said, the study indicates that gluten in and of itself is causing leaky gut syndrome. And that is something I personally choose to avoid. And since I gave up gluten, which was a long time ago now, I haven't experienced any symptoms. And yes, I have done other things, but I have noticed by giving it up long term, rather than having a little bit here and there, which just didn't work for me, but just not having it at all, I have seen my health go from strength to strength. But I just want to caveat that I have done other things as well. And it's very hard when you have been able to reverse your symptoms, especially for me after 25 years, to know exactly what helped me the most, because I did a lot of things at the same time. I worked on my gut, I took gluten out my diet. I was also doing lots of things from a lifestyle perspective, changing things in my life, helping with my stress levels, moving and doing lots of different types of exercise practices. So I can't just pinpoint it to one thing, but I do know since giving it up, I feel a lot better and my body feels a lot stronger in respect to that. And I think it is probably that link with my gut rather than me having this immune response to it, because I did test negative for celiac disease, although there are lots of different markers for celiac disease that your doctor won't test for, and that's why I run the Cyrex panel with a lot of my clients if they suspect that they do have an issue with gluten, because it just gives you the complete full picture rather than just looking at a couple of different antibodies. So let's quickly recap on what this study indicates, and it indicates that gluten's effect on the gut lining is the main cause of inflammation in celiac disease. And in the view of this study, gluten directly damages the cells of the intestinal lining, making them more permeable, which triggers chronic inflammation and potentially leads to celiac disease in predisposed people. So what does predisposed people mean? Well, there are a couple of genes, the HLA genes, which stands for human leukocyte antigens, and they're proteins that are found on the surface of cells, and they're absolutely vital in identifying self-tissue. And when there are issues with these genes, which obviously causes an issue with the proteins, it means that your body is more susceptible to reacting to different antigens. So most people might see this oligomer and this superantigen and maybe not respond to it. However, if you have a variation in these HLA genes, especially HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8, then it may mean that you're more predisposed to this type of reaction that can lead to celiac disease. What it doesn't mean is that if you have these genetic variations that you're going to get celiac disease. It just means that you're more predisposed to it. And that's the thing with genetics. It's the environments that the genes are in which play a much more significant role than the genes themselves. Remember, the genes load the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. So understanding this mechanism of the superantigen and its impact on the gut could potentially lead to the development of new therapies. And that's really the basis of this study. They want to find therapies for people who have celiac disease. For example, the drugs could be designed to inhibit this oligomerization process and thereby maintaining the integrity of the gut barrier and potentially alleviating symptoms of celiac disease. So the basis of the study is to develop treatments around that. It is a groundbreaking study because it provides this molecular explanation for how the integrity of the intestinal barrier is compromised in celiac disease, which is, as I said, very good for therapies, but it may give nutritionists and functional medicine practitioners something to think about as well, because there is potentially therapies and other things that we can do to help with that too. And for anybody that has this type of response, going gluten-free is going to be the first approach in reducing symptoms, because just think about the damage that might be done to the gut during that time. We need to repair the gut so that you can start to absorb your nutrients again, because 9 times out of 10 when I'm working with somebody with an autoimmune disease, nutrient deficiencies are at the heart of it. It's not the root cause of it, because we need to understand why the nutrient deficiencies are there in the first place. But one of the reasons could be the damage that gluten can have on the intestinal wall. And I'm pretty sure that's what happened with me. I was unable to put on any weight. I was nutrient deficient. I had issues going on in my gut, so I just wasn't absorbing anything, and it did take time to see the results. And I think that's when people go gluten-free for a month, they don't see the results that they were looking for, but it can take a lot longer than that. And I would honestly say it took me 3 to 6 months to see the benefit of going completely gluten-free rather than dabbling and having the odd pasta dish here and there. You need to repair and regenerate the cells in the gut lining. So it's been a very fascinating study. What can you do from a diet and lifestyle perspective to help manage celiac disease? Well, as I said, first and foremost, going gluten-free is going to help you. And actually, when you're in pain and you have issues related to celiac disease, I don't think you're going to find it difficult to give up gluten. And there are so many alternatives now. If you ever need any suggestions around gluten-free foods, or if you're a producer of gluten-free foods, I'd love to hear from you, because I have lots of recommendations. I've been gluten-free for a long time now, and I know the good stuff versus the bad stuff. And, you know, whole foods is always going to be your best option. But if you need something convenient, or you fancy having a piece of toast or some pasta at some point, then I have tried a lot of these different products. So feel free to send me a message if you'd like to hear more about that. When it comes to gluten, it can be hidden in lots of different foods. So make sure that you read the labels thoroughly, because it's very easy to get caught out. And if you eat out, make sure that you tell the restaurant that you need your meal gluten-free. And if you are celiac, let them know, because even cross-contamination in food could be an issue for you. If you're recently diagnosed with celiac, then I would certainly be focusing on eating a nutrient-dense diet. It is likely that you are nutrient deficient at the moment, just because it can cause that damage in the intestines, which means you're possibly not absorbing enough food. You see a lot of iron deficiency as well in celiac disease. It can be one of the indications that somebody has celiac disease when they have unexplained iron deficiency. And always check in with your vitamin D levels as well, because the vitamin D is what creates immune tolerance in the body. And when we are low on vitamin D, it means that we are more prone to these autoimmune responses. And then take care of your gut health generally, and that's going to be different for everybody. I could tell you today to incorporate lots of fermented foods in your diet, and that's going to feed your gut microbiome and keep your gut microbiome healthy. And that will be true for some people, but recently I've been working with lots of people who have histamine intolerance, which can be caused from candida, but also bacterial dysbiosis in the gut. and other factors as well, like IgE responses to food antigens. And I'll be covering that in a later podcast because it's coming up a lot in my clinic at the moment, these histamine issues, which are contributing to symptoms. So somebody will think that their symptoms relate to their autoimmune disease, like fatigue or brain fog or headaches, but actually it can be to do with the fact that there is a lot of histamine building up in the body, and that can be linked to these imbalances in the gut. And unfortunately, fermented foods just add fire to that and can cause even more histamine release. So if you are experiencing any symptoms or any unexplained symptoms that may be a sign of histamine intolerance, like itchy skin, headaches, fatigue, runny nose, shortness of breath, wheezing, and having digestive issues like diarrhea and bloating, then histamine might be at the heart of it. So it might be something that's worth exploring for you. But one thing that we can all do is to make sure that we keep ourselves hydrated, which is crucial for our overall health and digestion. Again, I'm working with clients, they have been doing everything right with their diet, they are meditating, they're doing yoga practice, they're doing lots of exercise, but they're forgetting to drink enough water in the daytime and actually adding minerals to that water as well, because especially when it's warm, you are probably sweating out those minerals. So you need to make sure that you're putting them back in the water. And when we're having filtered water and taking minerals out, and making sure that we're drinking clean water, which is important, but we need to add those minerals back in. Or, drinking mineral water is a really good alternative too. So there are a few things that you can think about, and working on that autoimmune response, bringing down inflammation in the body is going to be a key part of that, and exploring what potentially led to the development of the autoimmune disease in the first place. Was it just the fact that you ate gluten, or were there those imbalances in your foundations, in your terrain, that led you to develop an autoimmune condition? And actually some viruses may cause cross-reactivity, which may lead to celiac disease as well. And that's probably a conversation for another episode. But it has been a groundbreaking study. I think a lot of people who work with clients with celiac disease will find this type of study encouraging, because many people working in this field see that leaky gut syndrome and the inflammation that it causes is in and of itself destructive, and that can be triggered by gluten. So I'm not saying go gluten-free. You need to do what's right for you, and I wouldn't recommend anybody removing a whole food group without considering the things to bring back into the diet. And there have been numerous studies around people giving up gluten and actually causing more harm than good because they haven't added the fibre back in. So it's always best to work with a health practitioner or nutritionist like me. Feel free to contact me if you would like to find out more about my services and how we can work together and how I can design a diet plan that is going to work for you. I personalise all my health plans to make sure that they are right for my clients. And I can talk about some of my other services as well and the testing. So feel free to book a free call with me. You will find the link in the show notes. But if not, you can also pop over to my Instagram account at the Autoimmunity Nutritionist and send me a direct message over there, or join my free group, the Autoimmune Forum. I am hosting a free challenge next week around anti-inflammatory diet and living, and I'll be sharing a meal plan with that. But each day I'll be setting a challenge all around how we can bring down inflammation in our bodies. So I hope to see you there, but if not, have a fantastic rest of your week and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time, and remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.